the University of Virginia, and she is an MSNBC medical contributor. Always good to see you, doctor. Let's talk about the kind of dent that 1.8 million doses could make in the effort to protect people against monkeypox.
Right, it's unfortunate that we are in a situation where we have a great demand and a limited supply. We know over the last 2 weeks, we've literally doubled our cases in the United States of America, up to 14,000 at this point. And the question is, are those vaccines going to the most vulnerable persons? When you talk about LA County, we know that we now unfortunately have outbreaks within jail systems and within homeless shelters. Those populations are high risk, but we also see across our nation, in New York City and in Georgia, for instance, we're seeing that there's a lack of equity. We're not seeing the most vulnerable communities getting the access to the vaccines first. And when the most vulnerable are not targeted first for interventions, all of us will suffer. We have to take care of those that are most at risk.
Well, look, we've got this release coming as New Yorkers are reaching that 4-week time frame for their second dose with absolutely no word from the city on how soon they'll be able to get the vaccine so they can make those appointments. What do you tell the patients who, frankly, are nervous because they're waiting for their second dose and it's time?
Right, it's going to be one of those moves where we have to make real-life decisions in real time. Unfortunately, we do have that shortage, and we tried to make some adjustments by doing dose sparing, meaning instead of that intramuscular injections or subcutaneous injection, we're doing right under the skin that can allow us to do a lower dose and have still that same efficacy. That only gets us so far, right? We know that it takes weeks before we can have bottling of the vaccines made available for distribution within the United States. And so the majority of Americans don't expect to be vaccinated before 2023. So what does that mean? That means we have to target first the most vulnerable communities, make sure those individuals get access to that vaccine now, and especially if they've had exposure to monkeypox at this point. And that way we can mitigate the spread. It's the same exact concept that we were talking about with COVID-19 back in 2020.
There's also news on the COVID front. This morning, Pfizer-BioNTech asked the FDA to authorize its new COVID booster shot, designed especially for the BA.5 Omicron subvariant, for those who are eligible for another booster. Should they get it now? Should they wait for that new formula to be approved? What's your best advice?
Right, I think we need to follow the science, and I would love to see the data on what are the outcomes now with the current population that we have with COVID-19 exposures. The question is not necessarily if the technology is going to be able to keep up. My question is, will the population be welcoming of that? At this point, only 37% of Americans have received a booster shot. We've been stagnant at 2 doses at 67% in America for months now. What will we do moving forward? Will people buy into this idea that we are following science and understand that it's those interventions that keep people alive, because we're continuing to bury people from COVID-19 today, and that doesn't have to be the case. We can get vaccinated, we can get boosted, and we can wear those masks to help prevent infection in the first place.
I know that there are people who have at least said to me anecdotally that they've been waiting for this. They wanted to make sure that they were protected against the BA.5. Once that's available, would you recommend to them, if they've been waiting for the booster, go get it?
I most certainly would. We have to understand that until we stop this telephone game of viruses going from person to person to person, every time it goes to another person, it wants to make sure it can stay alive. So what does it do? It slightly changes itself, that's where we get the variants. The more people we get vaccinated to interrupt that telephone game, the more likely we will be to getting closer to not having another variant that makes BA.4 and 5 looks like child's play. We know we get a surge every July. We know we get a higher surge every November. So getting those vaccines, getting those boosters before we head into fall will be what keeps us from burying 4,000 people a day like we have in the previous years before us, right? So that's what we need to start doing. And like I said, especially with schools opening back up, getting those children vaccinated, getting them boosted, they've not been boosted at this point, and really try to mitigate the spread again in 2022.
Dr. Ebony Hilton, thank you so much. Always good to see you. Mounting fears of possible escalation from Russia in its